The measurements you're going to be needing are our hip circumference. This is simply the circumference around your hip, and waist circumference, which is 28. This is the circumference around your waist. That is where you want your trouser waist to sit. Waist to hip 10. This is the measurement from your waist to your hip. And crotch depth. To take your crotch depth, what you need to do is you need to sit on a flat surface, say a chair that has no foam or padding, and then you measure from where you want your trouser to sit on your waist to the chair. Then you need your trouser length. It's 42. Knee circumference 17. Ankle circumference 13. So please, you use your own measurement when you want to try out yours. Start by drawing a horizontal line at the top here. This is my starting point line at the top, and I'm going to be calling it my waist line, or WL. So I'm going to be imputing my waist to ankle measurement, which is 42. I will draw a line across a horizontal line. Call this my ankle line, or AK. Also going to be drawing another margin on this side of my pattern paper. You do not need any measurement for this line, it's just a margin. Next, I'm going to be marking my waist to hip line. So my waist to hip is 10 inches. I'll mark that here. Next, I'm also going to mark my waist to crotch depth, or my crotch depth measurement, which is 11.5. In my crotch depth measurement, 11.5. So this is my hip line and my crotch depth. This line is my outer seam. I'm going to call it OS. Next, I'm going to divide my hip measurements, hip circumference measurements by 4, which is 40 divided by 4, and that is 10. And I'll mark 10 here. I'll mark it on the crotch line. And I'm also going to mark that on the waistline as well. Hip divided by 4, 40 divided by 4, 10. So I'm going to connect. Next thing I'm going to be doing is my crotch extension. So to get my crotch extension, what you need to do is to divide your hip by 16. So my hip divided by 16, which is 40 divided by 16, will give me 2.5 inches. So I'm going to extend this line by 2.5. This is where you should do your crotch extension. So from this point, that is this point here, I'm going to extend it by 2.5. To measure the distance from my crotch depth line, which is this line, to my ankle line here, 30.5. So I'll divide what I have by 2, and when you divide 30.5 by 2, it would give you 15.25. So this is 15.25. I'll measure 15.25 from this crotch depth line downwards. This is 15.25, and then I'll come up by 1 inch. This is 1 inch. Put a line across. This is my knee line. I'm going to call it KN. Next, we need to determine the center line of our trouser. So to determine the center line, what we will simply do is I'm going to measure what I have on this crotch line. Okay. So for me here, I have 12.5. So I'm going to get half of 12.5, or I'm going to divide 12.5 by 2. So 12.5 divided by 2 is 6.25. So this here is 6.25. And this is the midpoint of this line. So when you're drafting your own, you want to find the midpoint of this crotch line. Okay. So when you find the midpoint, we're going to measure what we have from here, from this outer seam line to the midpoint. It's 6.25 as we determined earlier. So now I'm going to mark this 6.25 on this knee line and on the ankle line. So here I'll mark 6.25, which is the midpoint of our thigh line, of our crotch line rather. and I'll mark the same thing on my ankle line. Let me repeat it again so it's clear. So to get the center line of your trouser, what you need to do is you need to get the midpoint of your crotch line. When you get the midpoint, to get the midpoint, it simply means you have to divide what you have on this entire line by 2. So when I divided mine by 2, it gave me 6.25. So I simply took that 6.25, I marked it on the knee line, and I marked it on the ankle line as well. Now I'm going to connect all that midpoint line all the way to the ankle. This is our center line. Now we're going to be imputing our knee circumference measurement and our ankle circumference measurement. Now, this is how we're going to be imputing our knee measurement. We're going to take our knee measurement and divide it by 4. And then we're going to mark what we get on both sides of the center line. Let me repeat it again. Knee measurement divided by 4. Whatever we get, we impute the measurement on both sides of this center line on the knee. Now, our knee circumference is 17. 17 divided by 4 is 4.25. I'll mark 4.25 on this side and also 4.25 on this other side. I'll do the same thing for the ankle. So the ankle circumference is 13. 13 divided by 4 is 3.25. So I'll mark 3.25 on this side. And 3.25 on this other side. Now starting from my crotch line, I'm going to be connecting to these points which I drew on this side. And down to the knee. So this is our new outer seam line. So next, I'm going to be connecting from this crotch extension point to the point where I marked on the knee line, as well as the ankle line. Now on this part of my trouser, I'm going to be coming up. I'll come up here by 2 inches. I'll mark 2 inches here. And on this 2 inches mark, I'm going to come out by half of an inch. Now I'm going to draw my crotch curve. Next, I'm going to be imputing my waist measurement. To impute my waist measurement, I'll divide what I have on my waist as my waist circumference by 4. So my waist circumference divided by 4 is 7. So I'm going to be marking it from this point towards the side. So I'll mark 7 here. And then using my hip curve ruler, I'm going to be connecting this point to my hip line. Now if you want to add that to your trouser, to the front of your trouser, which I usually do not do, which is why there's no darts on this front part of my trouser pattern, what you need to do is, after dividing your waist by 4, what you want to do is you're going to add, take for example, I divide 28 by 4 and I get 7. I'm now going to add the dart allowance which I want to add. If for example I want to add 1 inch as my dart allowance, I'm going to add an extra 1 inch. So I'll start marking my curve from here back to the hip line. I hope that's clear. And as for where I'm going to be putting I should put my darts for the front part, what you need to do is, you see this center line of the trouser, what you need to do is extend it. I'm just going to extend this just to illustrate what I'm talking about. So you just extend it up here. I'll use a broken line because I don't really need this center line on this part in front. So I'm just going to extend it here. So when you want to put your darts for the front, after you've added your dart allowance by the side, of course, this is where your darts will be located. Okay, so you just add your darts to this portion of your the front part of your trouser. So now we're going to cut, and then we'll go to the back panel. Before cutting, I'm going to be adding seam allowance or hemming allowance to the down part of the trouser. So you would want to determine how much hem allowance you want to add. So for me, I like to add 2. You can add more than that if you like, but make sure it's not less than 2 inches. Okay, so I'm going to be adding 2 inches seam allowance for this trouser. So I'll just mark 2 inches down here, mark it on several points. So now I'm going to rule a line here. This is my hem allowance or seam allowance for the down part. So before I start cutting out this front panel, I would have to fold in this allowance. This is what my front panel looks like after cutting. So now I'm going to take this front panel and put it on a fresh paper, and I'm going to tape it down so that we can also draft our back panel. So I've taped it down on another paper. So what I'm going to do next is I'll be extending these lines. I will extend the waistline on this side. I'm going to be adding seam allowance on this back panel for the hemline. We're adding 2 inches just like I did for the front. This crotch extension from the back, I'm going to be coming down by half of an inch. So I'll come down by half of an inch. Mark half of an inch downwards here. Then on that half of an inch mark, I'm going to be coming out by 2 inches. So I mark 2 inches here. Then now I'll extend this center line. This center line, I'm going to extend it upwards with a broken line still, because it's meant to just serve as a guide. So now I'm going to find the midpoint between this center line and this part of my front bodies, my front block. So I'm going to find the midpoint between here and here. I'll measure what I have here and I will divide it by 2 and I'll mark it here. This is the midpoint of my center line and this side. So on this midpoint, I'm going to come up by 2.5. Now, how did I arrive at 2.5? So 2.5 is the crotch extension for your front. Remember when you divided your hip by 16 to get your crotch extension? So my crotch extension for the front was 2.5. So that 2.5 is simply what I'm going to be marking upwards here. So now I'm going to lift my front panel a little bit and I'll just fold it so I can draw a curve from this point, this 2.5, this point where I went up by 2.5 to this point where I came down from the crotch line by ½ inch and marked 2 inches from here. So I'm going to connect from this point to this point. So now what I need to do is I need to mark the waistline of this back panel. So to get the waistline, what I need to do is I would need to divide my waist by 4, also like I did for the front. So waist divided by 4, 28 divided by 4 in this case is 7. For the back, I'm going to be adding darts. So the dart I would like to be using for my back, the back side is 1.5. So I'm going to be adding 1.5 to what I have for my waist. So my waist divided by 4 is 7. 7 plus 1.5 is 8.5. So I'll be marking 8.5. Look at how I'm marking it in a slant form. Okay, so I'm going to be marking from here to wherever 8.5 falls on this line. That is why I extended the waistline for the front. I extended it here on this paper, on this my new paper. So I'm going to mark in that 8.5 from this point to wherever it falls on this line. So let's measure. And this is 8.5 here. This is where we have 8.5. So I'll use a straight ruler or the straight side of my ruler and connect it. So next we're going to be adding allowance on the remaining parts of our trouser. So I'll start from the knee line. So for the knee line, I'll add 1 inch on both sides. I have 1 inch here. And 1 inch on the other side. For the ankle line, one inch here and 1 inch on the other side. I'll connect with a ruler. So I've added all my allowances to the side. Next thing I'm going to do now is this hip line. I'm going to be extending it on the new paper I added under or on the back panel. So I'll just extend it because we're going to need it for the darts at the back. I'm going to remove this front panel so that we can continue working on the back panel. So now I'm going to, this is my hip line which I extended. So I'm going to just connect it back so that it's clear. So this is our hip line. And then the hemline, I'll just complete it. Now to do our darts, what we need to do is I'll need to measure the distance from this part of my front piece to this center line. So we want to get the distance from that point to the center line of our trouser. So we have 3.75 here. So I'll just transfer that to this, the waistline of my back panel. So this is where our dart is going to be. I'm also going to come down a bit here, and I'm going to also mark 3.75 again, which is what I have here, what we have as the center line for the front panel. I'm going to mark it here, and the reason is we want our dart line to be parallel to this line here. We don't want it standing in an awkward manner. Okay, so we want it to be standing parallel to this line. So I'm just going to come down a bit before the line starts to curve. Before this particular line starts to curve, at the point where it's still straight, I'll just come down a bit and mark what I have here as well. So I'm marking 3.75 here. So now I'm going to connect these lines with a broken line because it's just meant to serve as a guide. So I'm just drawing a broken line here. I'm going to draw this broken line all the way to the hip line. So now on this hip line, to make my darts, I'm going to come up by 2 inches on the hip line. So on this hip line, I'll mark 2 inches here. So this 2 inches mark is where our dart is going to stop. I'll come back up here. So you remember we left on this side, on the waistline, we left 1.5 inches for our dart allowance. So we're going to divide that 1.5 by 2, and we're going to share it on both sides of this line. So 1.5 divided by 2 is 0.75 or 3/4 of an inch. So I'll mark 3/4 of an inch on one side and 3/4 of an inch on the other side. And I'll connect it to that 2 inches mark. And that's our back dart for our trouser. So now we're going to cut it out, but before we cut it out, we're going to fold in our hemline. Thanks for watching, guys.